Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see you here. We'll just give everyone a couple more minutes to join before we get started. Okay, well, we might get into it then. Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Wern, and I'm one of the committee members of SIMNA's Western Sydney chapter. And thank you so much for joining us here today. It is great to see you all, and we're really looking forward to what will be a great session. So I'd just like to open up by acknowledging the countries on which we are meeting on and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd now like to pass over to Lisa, who will run us through some of the housekeeping for today's session. Thank you, Lisa.
Hi everybody, my name is Lisa McGee and I am SIMNA's lead doer and connector. I would also like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet with you today, the Darawal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As Katie says, a little bit of housekeeping to get us started. As you'll see, you are on mute. Please stay muted for the duration of our conversation today. We are also recording this session so that those that can't be here can watch this at a later date. And also I encourage you to please use the chat function. Questions are welcome at any point in the session today, so please post those questions and Katie will ask our panelists your question on your behalf. A little bit about SIMNA before we get started as well, for those who are new to us. SIMNA is a growing learning network of members across Australia who believe that understanding and measuring social impact is vital to achieving the best possible outcomes for all Australians, our communities and our environment. We're very open, please, we are. Everyone is welcome. If you're not a SIMNA member, please join us. Membership starts at just $60 a year. And whether you're an experienced practitioner or you're new to the field, we're on this journey together. So here's to a great session. I'll hand over now to my colleague Amy to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Amy Lawton. I'm the co-chair of the SIMNA Western Sydney Committee, and it's our pleasure to have everyone here this afternoon. Before we jump into it, I would just like to have a chat about a couple of things. Firstly, why we have a Western Sydney Committee for SIMNA, and also why we chose the Groundswell Project, and then I'll go into introducing our guest speakers. So we have a Western Sydney Committee for SIMNA. It has been going for just over 2 years, and we chose to have a committee for Western Sydney because it is a large and unique region. We span a large area of land from the Hawkesbury to the north, Campbelltown and Wallandilly to the south, Blue Mountains to the west, and Parramatta to the east. So we have a large region. It is also a growing region. We're the third largest economy in Australia, and we have fast population growth with 1 in 11 Australians living in our community. So, and it is a community of high cultural diversity. So with all those things in mind, it brings both opportunities and challenges, including around social impact measurement. So that's kind of the reason why we have our committee. So today's session, we will be focusing on the interesting and innovative work undertaken by the Groundswell Project, which they have taken work on in Western Sydney and beyond. Since its beginnings, the Groundswell Project has placed a high importance on research, evaluation, and impact, And as a result, we just naturally felt it would be a wonderful case study to look further into. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests for this session. So today we have Jessie and Linda with us from the Groundswell Project. So Jessie Williams is currently the CEO of the Groundswell Project. She's been with the Groundswell Project since 2012 in various roles, and has also previously done some work in consultancy, training and policy development. She's also currently the co-chair of the New South Wales Ministry of Health Consumer Representation Committee. We also have with us Linda Fitzhardinge, who is Groundswell's Partnerships Director. Now, Linda has just joined the Groundswell Project in 2020 to deliver the Partnerships Program to organisations interested in exploring and implementing the business case of compassion at work. She's experienced in the delivery of quality programs that grows an organisation's resilience, sustainability and profitability value within their workplace culture. Linda engages with board of directors, C-suite and people leaders to identify, create, enhance and deliver tailored, creative compassion at work programs that uplift the importance of a company's most valuable asset, which is its people. So on behalf of the committee, we'd like to welcome both Linda and Jessie this afternoon. Thank you for having with us. We might just jump straight into the questions because an hour goes very quickly. So we'd like to start off with you, Jessie. So to begin with, if you could just briefly tell us about the type of work that the Groundswell Project does and a bit about its journey with social impact measurement to date.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. Lisa, your self-introduction was so inspiring to me. You said you're a doer and a connector. And I thought, God, that's what we are at Groundswell too. So thank you for such a great title. And thank you to SIMNA for inviting us. We've been fans of SIMNA for a long time, and preparing for today has given us a chance to stop doing all the doing and actually reflect on some of the work that we've done. So thank you, Amy, for the warm introduction. And Western Sydney is a passion area for us. So look, I'm just going to share my slides. I can just go straight to that now. Yeah. Okay, so firstly, absolutely want to acknowledge the land on which I'm joining you today. I live and work on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. So the Groundswell Project, our purpose is really to improve how people in Australia die, care and grieve. And you'll notice I say people in Australia, not Australians. There's a lot of people in Australia, some who have citizenry and some who don't. So I guess if you consider our name, the Groundswell Project, from our very beginnings 11 years ago, we set out to mobilise a groundswell of social change in the end-of-life space. Now that might sound curious to some people to talk about social change and end of life, because end of life is about endings. And what we do in that space, in that ending space, is we bring a lot of hope. We bring a lot of capacity building, and we bring a lot of passion and heart for the work that we do. So end of life spaces, or the end of life experience, is a significant event that obviously impacts greatly on the person who's facing their own end of life, but it's a significant life effect that affects up to 5 or more people around them. So we draw on the arts, we draw on community development theory for a lot of our work. We work in partnership with health services, both primary health and palliative care. We work with aged care, and our philosophical perspective is one of working with the whole community. So our programs are developed on the back of a lot of research, and that research is derived from a multi-university collaboration called the Caring at End of Life Research Team, and it's really on their shoulders that we stand. And in some ways, the Groundswell Project, as an independent not-for-profit, has acted as one important vehicle for the practice-led research that this incredible collective has produced over the years. So Amy, you mentioned our social impact measurement. Well, I think when it comes to a theory of change, simple is always the best. So our overall operating theory of change is death is often medicalised and institutionalised in Australia, and the healthcare system does not harness the real value of involving family and friends in the process. Most family and friends want to be involved, but they do not have access to the ideas, the spaces, the information that empowers them. So therefore, there is insufficient community capability to provide meaningful support to individuals and their families. So for us at Groundswell, if we address the social conditions, then the experience of that final phase of life should improve. And it's really inspiring for us to be able to work in the space of endings, in particular life endings. And in doing so, we work, as I mentioned, with capacity building, capability building, and hope. And we have a saying at Groundswell that we build on what's strong, not what's wrong. And this is our fundamental philosophy that has kept us going for so long. And I just want to give a quick acknowledgement to some of the partners that have supported us, because we've been doing this work for, nearly 11 years now. And it's without, we could not have done it without the support from our health partners, from philanthropic partners, from corporate partners, and now from New South Wales government. So that's a snapshot, I guess, one snapshot.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jessie. And I suppose that leads us nicely into sort of the next set of questions, and we'll stay with you for the time being. So obviously the Groundswell Project has engaged in a number of projects where measurement features strongly, and one of those projects is the Death Literacy Index, which is one of the focuses of today's webinar. Maybe if you could tell us a bit about the Death Literacy Index, what it is and what it aims to measure, that would be great.
Absolutely. So, and this is like hot off the press stuff, right? So this is like, it's just really been validated this year, and the reporting's starting to come out, and it's an incredible milestone for the authors. So the story around the Death Literacy Index is that in 2017, we partnered with Western Sydney University to develop a benchmarking tool to measure death literacy. And the Death Literacy Index, in a nutshell, is a population-based measure of the capabilities and experiences a community has when it comes to death, dying, caring, and grief. So it's an online validated tool designed to measure the death literacy of populations, communities, or groups, and not individuals. That in of itself is one of the hallmarks of the index. So firstly, it begs the question, well, what is death literacy? And the easiest way I find to describe what death literacy is comparing it to health literacy, because health literacy is something that people can usually more often get their head around. So health literacy comes to people quite often when they have a disease. So in my case, I've got arthritis. It's a really fun disease, not. And so because I have arthritis, I've learned what drugs work. I've learned what kinds of doctors I should probably see. I've learned what works in terms of exercise and physiology. I've got empathy for what it feels like to be stiff in the mornings and to have flare-ups. And so I think about other people who have shared that experience. So I have a general level of health literacy because I have a particular disease. It's a little bit similar with death literacy in the sense that you actually develop knowledge around the experience of dying in the system that helps people when they die because you've cared for somebody or because you've had a life-limiting disease yourself. You develop what we call death literacy. So the index itself was designed to validate the concept of death literacy, but also the measurement of death literacy. So death literacy, as I said, it's mainly around having knowledge that's primarily derived from your own experience, such as caring for others, but putting that knowledge to use. The index itself is made up of 29 items across 4 scales, and you'll see them here: learning from experience, practical knowledge, community capacity, and factual knowledge. And you'll see practical knowledge and community capacity are broken into another 2. So the practical knowledge that we have when we have death literacy is we can talk about it and we can provide hands-on support. The community capacity element of death literacy is we understand what services and supports are available in our community, and we understand how we can access that help. So the death literacy can be used to take a representative sample to develop a baseline to work with. And we recently did this with Western Sydney University for the Brisbane South region. And that part of that project, we were able to show those results to a stakeholder committee, and they were able to have a conversation about what are the different levels of death literacy in our population. And the most important question is, what are we going to do about it? The Death Literacy Index can also be used to take a snapshot of a target population and to measure interventions with pre and post. So that's the index sort of in a nutshell, but I wanted to go underneath the index a little bit more and really show you this sort of image here, which always inspires me, because whenever I see an image of social networks and social network mapping, I go, that's what we mean when we talk about capital. So really, when we look underneath this concept, this is the body of work that it was derived from. So we look at the persons with illness in their everyday context of living within their communities. They are not separate individuals with needs that have to be met. So you can already get a sense of, we know about person-centered care and we think, yes, it makes sense. But actually, this is network-focused care. This is saying we live and breathe according to social determinants. We're so impacted by the people in our lives. We have to understand that as the map. So the question is, how can communities be supported to care for people at the end of their lives in a way that enhances meaning and value for both the person with that illness and all of the community members who participate in caring? So the Caring at End of Life research team pioneered this social network research at the end of life, and this is where the concept of death literacy came from. And this was 6 years of qualitative research. So the index itself was developed from personal narratives of carers with input from a wide range of professionals and experts, and was tested on a national sample of Australians. So that conceptual framework for death literacy was developed, and then the author set out to validate that framework and then develop an index. And the index itself took about 3 years, and it's just been, as I mentioned, released today.
Fantastic. Wow, released today. That's good timing.
Look, did I say today? I didn't mean today. I mean like this year,
Oh, okay.
Earlier this year.
very, very early on. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic overview, Jessie. Thank you so much for that. I suppose as we move along, we spoke about previously about how you've been on a journey of sort of validating this Death Literacy Index tool. Maybe if you could share a bit about that journey with us, that would be great.
Yeah, and absolutely. And so I will say again, you know, the authors that have developed this tool, they were the ones who were in the trenches of validation. So if anyone here would like to understand more about that, please just send us an email at Groundswell, and I will happily share your contacts with the authors who can give you more. They've also produced a report of the whole journey. But I guess a snapshot is, you know, the validation took place over 2 stages. The first stage was content development and expert review, and the second stage was a national survey and the creation of the actual index itself. And I wanted to share this report, Beyond Taboos, because this is a report of that stage 2 national survey that was conducted. We called it Beyond Taboos because we wanted to understand, you know, okay, we're looking under the hood just a little bit here. What are we seeing in terms of the capacity for people to care for each other? And so one of the themes that came up in this report was this idea of talking about death being taboo, which is why we called it Beyond Taboos. We thought that was good. 53% of Australians have helped someone plan a funeral. Now, if that's the case, they've probably talked about the topic in some way. 47% of Australians have provided emotional support to a dying person. If they've done that, they've probably not provided that support in silence. They've probably had conversations. So I wanted to share that because I think philosophically it's important when you're doing research to say, what is your perspective? What is the fundamental perspective that you have? And our perspective, I think, is shining through. We're capacity builders. So this was a really meaningful step towards validation. It also helped us continue the public discussions around what death literacy is and building the capacity of the Australian public. And so, yeah, and the authors, as part of the validation, they ran the index through 4, I'm pretty sure it was 4 communities, some overseas. And of course, one was in the Blue Mountains. What is it with Western Sydney? You guys are awesome in Western Sydney.
Fantastic, which leads us on very nicely into the next question. As you've just stated, it's been gone through the process of validation and implementation in a number of contexts, including in Western Sydney. Maybe you could share a bit about how it's been implemented in Western Sydney. That would be great, just as an example.
Yeah, so as part of the validation, the authors wanted to gain insights into how people are likely to use the Death Literacy Index, what the best way to use it is, and how to work with those results. because it's a social change organization, when you're going to measure stuff, you've always got to ask yourself, well, to what end, So, the idea of the index is always about the process, the process is as important actually as the results. So we were lucky enough to be funded to do some community development programs in the Blue Mountains. Blue Mountains also is lucky or not enough to have a slightly higher, faster aging rate than some other communities in Australia. So it was a good spot for us to run this through. So on behalf of a local steering group, the authors wanted to get a snapshot of death literacy of that population. So in early 2019, the index was sent out across the Blue Mountains. People heard about the survey via handouts, social media, lots of mailing lists and networks, local newspaper ads, and some face-to-face events. A total of 134 completed questionnaires were received. And that first survey results gave that steering group a bit of a sense of the audience that they were working with, and also a detailed understanding of the strengths and weaknesses that representative sample gave. So the second survey was distributed early this year, and the results of that survey post-intervention is looking to measure if and in what areas that community work that we've been a part of has made an impact. So I guess for us, why it's really great to talk about the index as it's showing up in a community is that for us as community development people, it provides a way to ground the community development work, which, as many people on this call will know, community development work is often political work because it's really hard to show meaningful outcomes as a result of short-term funding. We're often expected to show the world in a 12-month process. So, and especially in the end-of-life space, which is a highly, highly fractured and complex space to work in. So where we can, we seek to link the personal experiences of individuals to be a powerful catalyst to enhancing the culture and empowerment of the community. So in the Blue Mountains, we were able to incorporate the discussions of the index as part of the community gatherings. And we're also lucky to have the one individual who was helping the index be taken up by the local population. That person was always also the community development worker, the connector, the people who actually held those community level discussions. So we weren't separate. The data collection wasn't separate to the community intervention in of itself. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, great. Well, one more question before we wrap up the discussion about the literacy index, and I would just encourage people that if you have any questions to send them through the chat function. So as we think about the death literacy index, Jessie, maybe if you could just reflect maybe on a couple of challenges. Obviously, everything is not smooth sailing. We would like it to be, but it's not. So any challenges that you guys came across when working with the index?
Yeah, look, and the challenges are not surprising because it's community development work. So I think I'll just speak to one challenge, which we're in now. I think it's a challenge, it's a shared one, where we want the tool to be taken up by community leaders. It's for academics, it's for policy leaders, but it's also very much for community leaders, which means that it has to be easy, it has to be simple. And so we're currently looking at, what is it that we can do over the next however many months and years to actually help the community to take up this tool, to have a paper version, to self-score, to use the tool as the conversation starter, to say, okay, we're in the Illawarra. What is the snapshot looking like? What does this mean for the priorities? What does this mean for our strengths? And what decisions are we going to make on this? So I think it's just that creative challenge of how to get community uptake of a tool where it doesn't come with funding. It's not a funded or funding thing at the moment. So that's a creative challenge, and as I say, it's not unsurprising. I think the other one too is just the collection of data, because at the moment communities hopefully will be able to take up the index, collect their own data, make sense of that data. But what role can we and other organisations play to help them understand that data and not get into the ethical issue of an organisation collecting the data and thereby having some ethical considerations around that, which is a whole nother ball game that we would like to avoid. So yeah, those are my top of mind ones at the moment. But as I say, it's pretty new work, and there's a lot of stakeholders who are working with this measurement, and of course the authors are working with the measurement in a big way too. So hopefully it's a watch this space.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, look, thank you, Jessie, so much for talking us through the Death Literacy Index. And as you said, I'm sure there's a lot of resources that people can look into and read about it more in their own time, because it's just such an interesting and fascinating space. We might just take a short break. I'm seeing that, you know, we're a bit slow on the questions. I think everybody's just in awe of the work. But I'm just going to pass it on to my colleague, Katie. She has one specific question that we spoke about before we jump into Linda. So, Katie, maybe could you ask the question, please?
Of course. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Linda and Jessie. So the question that I have for you today is, the Groundswell Project was awarded the Social Impact Rating for 2020. Could you please describe to us what this rating is and what your organisation needs to do to get this rating?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we got that last year. So look, I'll just share, I would share as a post follow-up the link to this rating, because for us it was a really useful process. So what we did was the board and the team got together and we worked through the self-assessment framework and we rated ourselves and we went, okay, it's a little bit like the Reconciliation Action Plan, stage 1, where you do kind of your self-assessment. You got to look under your own hood. So we actually just went through that process and we found it really useful for us all to get together and get on the balcony and look at our work. So we did a self-assessment and then we submitted our results, and that was deemed as getting that rating. So for us, it was really confidence building, but yeah, so I would encourage everybody to actually go through that process, and happy to provide, I think we should provide the link afterwards.
Yeah, we'll definitely get that link, because it's sort of, as you say, an interesting process to go through, and certainly from an organisational perspective, if it's something you want to do some structured thinking around and action, it's certainly a tool that could assist in that journey. Well, look, thank you, Jessie, so much for talking through this first section about the death literacy. We really appreciate it. We might just jump over to Linda now, because we want to focus on the second project that we're looking at, and that's the Compassionate Workplaces Survey, or Compassionate Work. So thank you, Linda, for joining us. We really appreciate it. To start off, Linda.
Amy, I'm waving at you. We have some questions. Can we take 2 extra minutes for questions?
Absolutely. Yes, sorry, my goodness, in the scheme of getting excited, absolutely. A couple of questions to go forward.
Thank you. Katie, over to you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so we did have a press question come through privately, so I'll just pose this to you, Linda and Jessie. So are you able to comment on the link between the literacy index and access to appropriate care?
The word appropriate stands out. So that's a great question, and it's a complex question, because access to what we call the death system is multi-layered. So the index itself, you know, as I mentioned, it's got the 4 quadrants, and there's a quadrant there which is about knowing that there are community services and supports available, and then the ability to act on that, the ability to ask for help, the ability to talk to your neighbour and say, oh, this is what we know about, you know, services in our town. So I guess I would say the word appropriate makes me think about a slightly alternative view to healthcare, which is not putting people on a pathway, but understanding people in the communities in which they live, and understanding how people get information that is meaningful to us. How many of us have turned to a friend and said, you should call this person, they're great. That's within the realm of death literacy. And that's what the index tries to measure. So it's a complementary sort of element to you know, care and support, which we know our medical and health system must provide. But we also know that that system is massively overstretched. So if we don't understand how people get access to and act on information that is shared amongst their social networks and their communities, I think we're missing out on something big. I hope that somehow speaks to that, the essence of what was in that question, but it's a complex one.
Thank you, Jessie. That was great. I will just pose one extra question that's been asked. And it's a question that I was thinking about as well. We're wondering if you could please elaborate a little on how you managed to get by without the Death Literacy Index prior to this information being available. What resources did you draw on in that time to assist with some of this work?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So I guess that's about 5 years worth of work, if I just did maths and really quickly without the index. I mean, I think, you know, the Groundswell Project was founded by two amazing academics who are committed to social change. So all the projects that we did in those early days were based on a fundamental belief that we can do it better. So our very first project was a drama project where we worked with high school kids. And we brought in people who have a lived experience around end of life. And we supported young people to ask those individuals, what is it like to know that you've got a year left? And then those young people were supported by drama teachers to go and create a performance. Now, we didn't have any evidence that that was going to work. We didn't read something and go, oh, well, we were inspired by other stories around the world. Of course, everyone is. But we were like, well, let's just do it and see what happens. And so we did it. No one died as a result. No laws were broken. Nothing bad happened. It was all amazing. And so we were able to then tell that story and hopefully inspire others and then get on to the next thing that is at that coalface, I guess. So, so there was a lot of ingenuity, a lot of creativity, and a lot of practice-led research. We were able to look back and go, okay, so people said that was a really wonderful thing to be a part of, and it wasn't as frightening as they thought it was going to be. So, you know, I think we've always built ourselves up over those years and hopefully built, you know, our friends in the sector up with us, hopefully.
I might just add one other thing there that I found interesting coming into this work, this body of work recently, is that you would expect some industries or some organizations to be more death literate than others because of the nature of the work that they do. And what we have found is that sometimes that actually isn't true. That, you know, people, perhaps you might think aged care might be people who are more literate in death, you know, because of the fact that they're, you know, the clientele that they're working with. And in fact, we find that often that's not the case. And so again, for us, as I say, it was an interesting question, and also the bringing back the, I guess, the literacy to the individuals and the communities, as opposed to handing it over to the organizations who are in the medical world and things like that. So I think that really drove a lot of that early work, didn't it, Jess? Is to really look at how do we reclaim that for the organizations, because the experience that people were having is that, gee, I wish I knew that. I wish I had that information and I didn't know that. And so really it's building on that.
Wow, thanks. That's really interesting work. I will just round out the question time with one final question that's come through. Is the index an Australian first, or are there other examples elsewhere in the world?
Oh, that is definitely a nerdy question that the authors would know all about. I mean, I think, you know, the Caring at End of Life research team in Groundswell have talked about the Death Literacy Index is a world first, absolutely. And it was in part modeled on the Health Literacy Index, which came before it. So yeah, it was Ophelia was one of the names used for the Health Literacy Index. But so yeah, so you know, all good ideas are a high resolution version of the one that came before. So nothing is truly new, but certainly the Death Literacy Index is now, you know, the academics have published the research, and it's out there as a world first, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Katie, for doing our question time. So we might just jump in to the conversation with Linda in our second part, looking at the Compassionate Workplaces program and the survey around that. So thank you, Linda, for joining us today to talk about that. Maybe to start off with, you could help us maybe define what a compassionate workplace is and how it is measured. It would be good to get our heads around this space because it's new for a lot of people.
Yes, thank you, Amy. And thanks very much again for having both Jessie and I on this. We're very excited to be sharing this work with you. I also wanted to put some context into this because when I joined the Groundswell Project, I also, we really are, our mission is very clear, and I wanted to understand, well, where does the compassionate workplace fit into all of this? And really, if you remember at the beginning of the very first slide, there was 3 sections in there. There was the live well, plan well, and die well. And really, compassionate workplace is about living well, because what we know about compassion too is that it's a muscle, and that the more you are able to use it in different scenarios, when you get to a scenario like end of life or life-limiting diagnosis, you will have more ability to have those important conversations and make those important decisions. So I think that's really the context of where the work with the compassionate workplace has come from. And it's not a new concept. Again, it's being developed. The US and the UK are also doing quite a lot of work in that. But we couldn't find a lot of work around that in the Australian context. So really, we've launched this a national survey on our website where we're asking organizations and individuals in those organizations, how compassionate is your organization? So that's the starting question. And really, we're looking forward to developing this. So why does why does it matter? Really, there's 2 key ways of understanding compassion in the workplace. The first one is about that, to understand that workplaces provide context and shape what we notice, how we feel, what we think, and what we do as individuals during our time in those organizations. And secondly, workplaces are filled with people and resources that can actually be coordinated to alleviate the suffering that happens in a workplace. So I think there are really 2 reasons, understanding of why compassion is really needed to understand that. How do we achieve that? Well, there's 3 things. First of all, we need to awaken the compassion in an organization. And really, we do that by reviewing the elements of the networks that are existing in the organization. We look at the cultural values that they've stated and also what's actually being demonstrated. We look at the work roles and the routines and actions of an organization on past, activities of suffering. And also, we really focus strongly on the leadership capability of delivering compassion. The second thing that we need to do is then we need to cultivate the compassion in a workplace. And that's not just the individuals, but we really need to look at the organization itself and how that works. And then the third step really is understanding how compassion shows up. So seeing what the structures and processes that we have in the organization that either make it harder or make it very difficult to express compassion. And again, not just on that interpersonal level, but on a systemic level as well. Next slide, please, Jess. So we can measure an organization's ability to deliver compassion by, first of all, assessing the self-compassion of individuals, and particularly, again, those leaders. And then secondly, really assessing and creating a series of compassionate workplace blueprints, as we've called them, for each individual in the organization, for the organization itself, and then finally, the overarching social architecture of the organization. I really wanted to talk about 2 scenarios where workplace compassion is absolutely required, but often not done well or completely missed. And that is downsizing and toxic workplaces. So the first one, downsizing. So downsizing creates suffering, obviously, for those whose jobs were eliminated, but it also creates the suffering for those that survive a restructure. And if any of you have gone through that, you'll know what that feels like. There's a term for it, survivor syndrome, right? Organizations often perform this downsizing process in a real perfunctory way, often behind, I guess, legal issues and concerns. And what we know is that if you can deliver this with the compassion, it can make a significant difference to the people's mental and emotional well-being during that event. And that's really important. And we found that in COVID right now, haven't we? Doing this with a thoughtful and respectful way allows staff, particularly those that are staying on after the restructure, to recover more quickly and get on with the work. Interestingly, the studies that have tracked performance of downsized organizations versus non-downsized organizations, even 9 years after an event, has shown a really interesting outcome, that an organization that has been downsized has never outperformed an organization that did not downsize. And I often wonder to myself whether or not CFOs and organizations are building that into the consideration in that cost benefit analysis that they might be doing. Next slide, please, Jessie. So research has also really demonstrated that managers and colleagues who open up spaces for compassionate conversations, even in the face of some of the challenges like toxic politics, poor performance, and other difficult to address, I guess, forms of workplace suffering, others do rise up and respond. And Jessie talked a lot about that around communities and the Death Literacy Index. It's about realizing what we have. So how do you know if you're in a toxic workplace? I think that's a question that often comes up as well. And it's a really important thing. The four that I kind of think really, for me, tell me that there isn't compassion and that there is some toxicity of these. The first one is that their verbal communication amongst people is very minimal. So employees in toxic workplaces don't really like to talk to each other. They don't see value in building relationships or meeting to achieve common goals, or really ensuring that anything that's clearly set out. They instead rely on email. I, in fact, worked in one organization that I started with where employees literally sitting beside each other were emailing each other. I mean, how crazy is that, you know? The next one that gives me a signpost is gossip, and it's tolerated. So where people don't want to talk to each other, but about each other instead. And it's often because when they are gossiping, they're doing it in the kitchen, in the corridors, or offsite. And offsite conversations often happen where people are saying things about other people that they would never actually tell them directly. So again, there's a level of compassion that is required for an organization to be able to strip that back. Another one that sort of gives me an indication is where trust needs to be earned in an organization. You know, experience and any previous results that you may have had don't count for anything. Everyone is on constant notice. Again, I don't know if any of you have experienced that, you know, I hope not. Everything is checked, double checked, triple checked. There's a list of people that need to be consulted. Every decision needs to go through a huge range of approvers. And really the processes are there for every single action that happens in an organization. And then finally, and probably the one that is most important, that points out the toxic environment for me and where compassion really needs to be shone through, is where there are no consequences. So poor performance, missed targets, things like inappropriate behavior and treatment of others really become status quo. And anyone can get away with anything. There's no one's ever been called account for the things that they have done, or more importantly, for the things that they haven't done. And I really wanted to distinguish that because that really does help us understand how compassion is. Next slide, please, Jess. So finally, I'm often asked to provide the business case for a compassionate workplace. I hear this quite a lot from organizations when I'm having the partnerships discussion. And I actually find this a little curious because, I mean, who wouldn't want a kinder, more inclusive and compassionate environment that we spend a large majority of our lives at? So look, we've created a snapshot for executive leaders and boards to highlight some of the value propositions. And I'm happy to share that again with the audience of the webinar as well afterwards. But there is a clear and evidence-based case for advancing compassion in the workplace, particularly as we return to work in this post-COVID world. There's been a groundswell of organizations who are now reflecting on understanding that building compassion in the workplace creates a culture, and that includes individuals addressing the needs of all the people in their organization to recover from life-challenging events. Maybe it's not the death and dying, but there are the other things that are going on in the organization. And it even helps them with minor setbacks. It really provides blueprints on how to support one another during difficult and challenging times that we may face together. And when you consider the future needs around leadership at the moment, going forward, talent, culture, innovation, and engagement, our focus on this strategic priority is a delivery. It delivers a number of benefits. And again, there are areas that we can actually mark this to are health and safety, economic, operational, and service delivery, and reputational, and most importantly, again, legal.
Fantastic. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, that's really interesting. And again, I think a lot of people wouldn't have thought a lot about this space of the compassionate workplace. So it's really great that you guys are doing a lot of work in this area, and we'd love to share the resources that you guys have or are coming up with. Just, I suppose, one more question in when we're talking about compassionate workplace. You've covered a lot in what you've just shared, but you spoke about that you're doing a national compassionate workplace survey at the moment. I'm sure there's, you know, people can look that up in their own time also, but there's also been a process of validating that tool, and I was wondering whether you could maybe just share a bit about that and that journey.
Yeah, so at the moment, it's just in its very early infancy. As I said, I've only joined Groundswell towards the end of 2020, and so we're really just in the process right now of just trying to get, I guess, the Australian public to really get in there and have an answer of these questions. And really, what we're looking at is the experience of compassion on an individual level, on an organizational level, and then that structural architecture level, because those three things really, as I mentioned, make or break how compassion can be shown up and ways that compassion can actually be accepted as the way we do things here. And it has to happen, interestingly, compassion needs to be shown from the top, but it needs to start from the bottom. And I think that's a real challenge for a lot of organizations, because what we find is that organizations want to hang on to the status quo of power. You know, we set the rules, you follow them. And again, compassion doesn't follow that, and it shouldn't as well. And what we also know is that compassion can start in small pockets and be as powerful as if it's an organization-wide viewpoint. And what we really want to do is a bit like death literacy, is it's a continuum. You know, we need to bring people along the continuum so that it becomes more of the norm, and people understand that it's a choice of how we behave, but more importantly, it's a way that we operate, and it actually can be an attraction and retention tool for talent as well, because people want to work with an organization that understands that they, in the end, they are human beings that when we show up to work. We're not robots. And, you know, we don't leave our grief at the door. It doesn't happen that way. It comes with us, and we need to know how to deal with that.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Linda, are there any other slides to share before we maybe? Okay, that's great. Before we go into questions, I'm wondering maybe, Katie, if I could pass it on to you again. There may be a few questions in regards to the compassion at work sort of area. So thank you, Katie.
Of course. Thanks, Amy. We have had a question come through, so I'll just pose this one on behalf of the sender. So this is, would compassion not be captured in the current workplace culture assessments? Is there a need for this level of specificity? It's a mouthful.
It is. I'm glad you said it, not me. So look, I think it will give you a highlight, and again, depends on how that culture survey is being done. One of the key things that you know, at the Groundswell Project is, we know that being a third-party, not-for-profit organization, is that we can go into an organization and create anonymity around who's actually answering the questions around it. Because I can tell you that if I'm being asked a question about my boss and I want to keep my job, I'm probably going to give you the answer you want to hear, not the one that actually is happening. And again, there's a smoke and mirrors that sometimes happens with these cultural, you know, workplace surveys, where, you know, again, if that is being done there, it gives you a baseline. But the question is, how do you move it? How do you move it? So if you have something and you're doing it well, then why don't you want to share that with other organizations? You want to share that with the industry you work in, because we need more of it. So we often say it at Groundswell as well. You know, if you're doing it well, tell us. We want to understand how you're doing it and highlight that great work. And if you're not doing it well, then let's help you get better at it, because every step makes a difference. So for us, I think the cultural surveys are great. A lot of organizations still don't do that. We still see values and statements on the walls that aren't being followed actually in the hallways. And it comes right from board level as well. We're dealing with lots of boards who need more compassion as well.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We just have another question, if you don't mind answering another. This one is, do you plan on sharing aggregate survey data from this work?
Yes, once we get to I guess a mass that we can start to release that. And Jessie is probably more familiar on how we do that side of things. So I don't know, Jessie, did you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah, I think it's just really important to note that these two things, the death literacy index and the compassion, are completely different. Yeah. So we're not researchers in the Groundswell team. We've commissioned research. We've partnered with researchers. So yeah, so the Compassionate Workplace Survey is a social change tool. As Linda said, we want the qualitative, we want the quantitative, and it's about getting a snapshot and starting a conversation. Absolutely. But in terms of like a valid measurement of compassion in an organization, I mean, we looked around and looked at grief surveys and grief indexes. And we're like, wouldn't it be great if we could do that? But I didn't find anything that came close to like really measuring the experience of grief in an organization really well. So we've got proxies. We know that if people have strong ties, and we look at from the social network analysis view, that is probably a good proxy for compassion. We also work with our definition of compassion, which is empathy and action. So if you don't do anything, compassion doesn't really show up. So yeah, so it's all of those sorts of things in the mix, isn't it, Linda, as we build the survey. But at the moment, yeah, it's like it's a powerful conversation starter and a reflection tool in order to do something different.
Yeah, and we often in the webinar, the public webinar that we hold, is I often say that doing nothing can be as adding to unnecessary suffering as doing the wrong thing as well. And so sometimes, again, just having some context around how to get out of your own way or not be in that circle of people that have to help in this individual's circumstance is okay too. And again, just identifying how that's going to look in your organization through a leadership lens is really important, because leaders really do set the tone on whether or not that can show up in your teams or not. As those other issues in the toxic workplace, you know, the leaders really are very much important in setting whether or not those things are those toxic behaviors are tolerated or not.
Fantastic. Katie, are there any more questions before we start wrapping up?
Thanks, Amy. I think that's about it. Thank you very much.
That went quickly.
Yes, it did go quickly. We are rapidly running out of time. So as we wrap up, I would just like to thank Linda and Jessie for their time and a really interesting discussion this afternoon on both the Death Literacy Index and the Compassionate at Work work that's being done at the moment. Certainly really interesting to hear about both sort of measurement activities, the importance of not just the person, but also the network around them, and the leaders within our organisations and the people within our organisations and what they can do to create a more compassionate space and place for those around us. So thank you again, Linda and Jessie. I'd also like to thank everybody who has joined us today. Thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to this webinar. Before we leave, a couple of things. I would be remiss if I didn't plug a few things before we finished. So at the end of this session, you will get a survey from Lisa at SIMNA. Who'll be sending it around after the session. And please, we would love to hear your feedback about the webinar and also about future webinars, what you'd like to hear. I'm certainly happy to receive that feedback. Also, as SIMNA, we're a member-driven organisation, so please join us if you have not done so yet. The more the merrier, and as Lisa said at the beginning, we are a learning network and we're all in this together. As we finish up this year, this is the last webinar for the year. And so we'd like to thank you again for fitting it in. We know it's getting busy, but we've also got the SIMNA Awards that are coming up on Wednesday. They are online, and for those who are interested in attending and being involved, we would like to extend that invitation to you also. I think I have covered everything. Lisa, is there anything else before we finish up?
No, you've done a superb job. Thank you everyone for today. It's been very insightful, really different, and hopefully we'll have you back next year to hear how you're getting on.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah.
Thanks, Linda.